Hello, I'm Jan Szerewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we look into the Russian intrigue in the US election and their laser-focused obsession with meddling in democracy. It is a dangerous game, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Since President Joe Biden dropped out of the race, the Kremlin's media apparatus has shifted firmly to Washington. As we watch this story unfold, let's remember that the Kremlin is always watching, especially when the result may turn things in their favor. Buckle up, because we're about to take a high-speed train ride through the twisted tracks of geopolitical madness.
In a recent briefing, a senior U.S. intelligence official revealed that Russia has begun efforts to influence American voters in the lead-up to the 2024 presidential election. According to the official, this marks a continuation of tactics observed in previous elections, where foreign interference sought to sway public opinion and disrupt the democratic process. The official indicated that Russia favors Donald Trump for president, saying the U.S. intelligence community had not changed its assessment from previous elections. Those assessments found that Moscow tried to influence campaigns to help Trump win in 2016 and 2020. The official, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, highlighted that Russian operatives are employing a variety of methods to achieve their goals. This includes spreading disinformation through social media platforms, amplifying divisive issues, and attempting to undermine public trust in the electoral system. The revelation comes amid heightened concerns about the integrity of the upcoming elections. Lawmakers and security experts are urging increased vigilance and robust measures to safeguard the electoral process. The U.S. has begun efforts to enhance its cybersecurity, improve information sharing among agencies, and educate the public about recognizing and resisting disinformation.
Now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. With President Biden announcing that he is not seeking re-election, the political arena has turned into a gladiatorial combat zone. Candidates are emerging left and right like mushrooms after a rainstorm, each one promising to be the savior of America. And is watching all this with keen interest none other than our old friend, the Kremlin. According to the Moscow Times, Putin's cronies are keeping a close eye on the US elections. Now, why would they care about who gets to sit in the Oval Office? Maybe because they have a penchant for meddling in other countries' affairs, much like that nosy neighbor who just can't resist peeking over the fence. The Russian government has publicly stated that their primary focus remains on the Ukraine war. But let's be real, they are definitely multitasking. The Kremlin is like that student who says they're concentrating on their homework, but you just know they have a dozen tabs open on their laptop. Next, let's turn to an alarming report from CNN. US intelligence agencies have sounded the alarm about Russia's potential influence operations in the 2024 election. Yes, it seems like the Russians are back at it again, trying to pull the strings of American democracy from half a world away. This isn't their first rodeo either. Remember 2016, when Russian operatives unleashed a tsunami of fake news, bots and trolls upon unsuspecting Americans, much like a digital invasion, and it seems like they're gearing up for round two. The report warns that Russia's tactics have evolved. They're not just spreading misinformation, they are planting seeds of doubt, division and discord. Their goal? To undermine faith in the electoral process, pit Americans against each other, and ultimately weaken the US on the global stage. So why is Russia so invested in the outcome of the US elections? Well, for starters, a US president who is more sympathetic to Russian interests could lead to a shift in foreign policy. It's like getting a new boss at work. Suddenly, all the rules change, and what was once off limits might now be fair game. The Kremlin would like to see a president who could ease sanctions, turn a blind eye to Russia's aggressive actions, and generally make life easier for those at the Kremlin. In conclusion, the 2024 US elections are shaping up to be another battleground for Russian interference. The Kremlin's dual focus on the war in Ukraine and the US elections is a testament to their relentless pursuit of power and influence. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Marek Menkiszak, head of the Russia department at the Center for Eastern Studies. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So do you think that the elections taking place later this year are going to have some similarities to 2016? This was the very first time when we've heard the term Russian interference. Could we be seeing more of this, or perhaps we already are?
Well, I think it will be a different case. Back in 2016, we've had a very clear, massive campaign of cyber intrusion of Russia in the US. Also dumping some materials, compromising candidates. So it was quite intrusive. Later on, Russians were mostly focused on campaigns in the internet, in social networks, using trolls, using various accounts to spread misinformation, disinformation, and using the psychological warfare. So basically, we could expect and we can expect some more of that also during this campaign. Russians constantly are spreading fake news, conspiracy theories, and try to instigate tensions, polarization. This is what they're interested in terms of US elections.
So who's going to be the beneficiary of this campaign? Back then it was said that it was mostly helpful to the Trump campaign, even though the Miller investigation eventually proved that there was no hard evidence of there being any sort of collusion, any sort of conspiracy. But it nevertheless stated that the Russians were interested in boosting the campaign of Donald Trump and deboosting the campaign of his rival, Hillary Clinton. Now, in this case, how is it going to play out? Do you think that Russians are mostly interested in sowing chaos, or do they have their own pick for the US president right now?
Well, I would put it on two levels. So on one level, obviously, and it's very clear within the Russian propaganda, the state propaganda, they're quite sympathetic to Donald Trump and his rhetoric. So the parts of Russian narratives are sort of a common, have a commonality with Trump people narratives, having impact on change of U.S. policies. So there are several elements in that. So one, Trump is perceived as more open to a certain political bargain, including over Ukraine, which can possibly came forward towards some Russian demands. It is also perceived, he's also perceived as a person who will add more tension to the transatlantic relationship, especially with the European Union. So it's also a good news for the Kremlin. And finally, this is the most important, it will make US more focused on internal affairs. So it could bring more disengagement of the US from global affairs, including war in Ukraine and including support for Ukraine. But also there is other element, which is unpredictability of Trump and his policies, his decisions, which makes Russians concerned. This is the first level. The second level is basically the major interest of Russia, which is the furthering polarization within the US to instigate a political crisis within the US. So what Russia, first of all, hope for is to increase the tension within the US, which will drag the attention of the American public and American policies, possible outreach in global affairs, especially in Europe. This is what Russia seeks in these elections. So it is, first of all, about chaos in the US rather than direct and open support for any candidate.
So against this background, what has been the reactions in Moscow to Kamala Harris stepping up and quite possibly becoming the Democratic nominee? I mean, her performance when it comes to fundraising has been impressive, and there is no other candidate in sight, at least for the time being. So we may assume with a fair degree of certainty this is going to be Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. But what have the reactions in Russia been, both official and unofficial?
Obviously, introducing Kamala Harris to the race now, substituting Biden, is a certain blow to a Russian narratives, Russian plan. Russians seem to used to the belief that Trump has already guaranteed win in these elections versus Biden. So recently, especially after the failed attempt of assassination on Trump, Russians kind of abandoned their formally neutral position on a high level, at least, towards the elections. Now it is difficult. It is more difficult situation for the Russians. So they've adjusting on two levels again. On the highest official level, clearly seen in statements of Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, who's refused to comment on the Kamala Harris candidacy. He said basically Kamala Harris has been not known to Moscow in terms of any practical policies towards Russia. She's known for quite critical, quite hostile rhetorics towards Russia, but she didn't participate in any policies. So he said she has no plus or minus in terms of Kremlin's assessment. It remains to be seen how she will run her campaign. And so this is kind of sign of at least formal neutrality. But the Russian propaganda, including the state propaganda, is quite vicious and started to attack Kamala Harris, starting to shift from kind of vicious comments towards Biden, now transferring that to Kamala Harris, portraying her as weak, as not very, not experienced, and even, well, to put it bluntly, a quite dumb person who is not qualified for the leadership. But this is the level of propaganda, which is obviously, which narratives are green-lighted by the Kremlin, but it is not official position of Moscow.
So this is what we're going to see on Russian TV, right? I mean, what the likes of Solovyov or Skabiev are going to be saying, that we have a weak candidate on the Democrat side, and they will be most like
starting criticizing.
Yes? Beg your pardon?
Yeah, these people started to basically make some ironic comments about Kamala Harris. But I think the major political approach of Moscow is now to wait for Kamala Harris to reveal her stance on major issues which are important for Moscow, being Ukraine and war being the most important of that. So they will not directly attack Kamala Harris until they will assess both their chances of winning and also her stance on these major issues.
Have you seen any phenomena that have not been there before when it comes to the Russian activities? Some people are pointing out that there is a huge activity from Russian bots, which are, once again, pretending to be American citizens. Do you think that the US government is monitoring this sort of activity in the light of previous accusations of election interference? After all, having foreign citizens posing as your own citizens and spreading certain political views, it's not the best thing for the public debate now, is it?
Well, this is not new. These kind of techniques have been applied by Moscow for many years already. So basically, everybody got aware of that, especially after 2016. So I think these occurrences you mentioned are reported by American media. So I believe there is ongoing monitoring and there is a high sensitivity towards this kind of actions. Obviously, the problem is the plausible deniability of some techniques, using proxies and basically using local American Western resources to spread these kind of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, which Russia basically tries to spin, but not necessarily fully directing in each case.
So plausible deniability, and then, where everything else fails, there is always the option to invoke the protection of the freedom of speech clause. I mean, this is what happens when certain narratives are being pushed away. Then the ones which are creating them are saying that, look, this is free speech and you cannot really censor it, even though we all know the source, right? The source being the Kremlin. Marek Menkishak was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise. And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has arrived in Beijing for a series of high-level discussions aimed at exploring China's potential role in ending the ongoing war with Russia. The visit marks Kuleba's first trip to China since the full-scale invasion by Russia began.
China, which has maintained a neutral position in the conflict, has strengthened its ties with Russia over the past 2 years. Despite this, Beijing claims that it does not provide lethal assistance to either side, unlike Western nations such as the United States. However, NATO has labeled China as a decisive enabler of Moscow's war efforts. Hence, Kuleba's trip is seen as unexpected by many observers, given Beijing's close relationship with Moscow and diplomatic maneuvering that has often seen Chinese diplomats keep their distance from high-level Ukrainian officials. During his stay, Kuleba is expected to meet with several key Chinese officials, including Foreign Minister Wang Yi and possibly President Xi Jinping. The discussions will likely cover a range of topics, from humanitarian aid and economic support to the broader implications of the conflict on global security and trade.
Ukraine and Moldova are discussing the return of Ukrainian draft dodgers who have sought refuge in Moldova. According to the Ukrainian ambassador to Moldova, some of these individuals have already been granted asylum in the country.
Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there have been numerous reports of men attempting to flee Ukraine illegally, often risking their lives in the process. The Ukrainian government continues to seek solutions to manage the issue. The Ukrainian ambassador to Moldova has said that Kyiv and Chisinau are currently in talks to return draft dodgers who escaped to the country. There are no official figures for the number of people who have illegally left Ukraine, but a November 2023 report by the BBC indicated around 20,000 Ukrainian men have crossed into bordering countries and escaped mobilization. The majority of those cases occur in Moldova and Romania. Some sources report that as many as 11,000 Ukrainian men could have fled into Romania alone.
Former Belarusian sprinter Krystyna Tsimanowskaja, who defected during the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, has announced she will compete for Poland in the upcoming Olympics in Paris. Tsimanowskaja, now a Polish citizen, has disavowed her former team and expressed a refusal to associate with Belarusian athletes at the Games.
In a recent interview, Tsimanouskaya stated she does not want to represent the current Belarusian government or its national flag. She emphasized her support for the historical white and red flag, a symbol of the opposition movement in Belarus. She said that after Russia launched its ongoing invasion of Ukraine, she stopped any contact with the majority of Belarusian athletes as they supported the war. Her deflection in 2021 followed her public criticism of Belarusian coaches, which led to an attempt to forcibly repatriate her to Minsk. Seeking refuge in the Polish embassy in Tokyo, she was granted a humanitarian visa and relocated to Warsaw, fearing for her safety if she returned to Belarus. The International Olympic Committee has allowed Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete in Paris only as neutrals, without national flags or anthems.
Finland has implemented a new law aimed at temporarily suspending asylum applications at its eastern border with Russia. This legislation also allows for the deportation of migrants who manage to cross into Finland from the Russian territory.
The Finnish government introduced a new migration law as a measure to counteract what it describes as weaponized migration. According to the country's interior minister, the law is not a part of broader immigration or asylum policy, but a necessary reform of border security. The law has sparked significant controversy and debate. It required a special majority in the Finnish parliament to pass, reflecting its contentious nature. Critics, including left-wing politicians and legal experts, argue that the law violates international agreements and human rights standards. Despite the criticism, however, the Finnish government maintains that the law is essential for national security.
End of the line for this episode of Eastern Express. More to come here on TVP World, so please do stay with us. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.